My spoiled sister secretly kissed my boyfriend just a week before her wedding, so I exposed their betrayal and watched her big day collapse in public. As a 28-year-old woman, I found myself in a challenging situation involving my 26-year-old sister and my 29-year-old boyfriend. My sister's wedding was fast approaching, and I began to notice that her behavior around my boyfriend was becoming increasingly peculiar. Initially, it wasn't anything overt, just small, subtle actions that left me feeling uneasy. It began with seemingly innocent comments, where my sister would often say things like, "Wow, you were so funny," in response to my boyfriend's jokes, even when they were not particularly amusing. She laughed a bit too enthusiastically at everything he said. At first, I tried to dismiss it, thinking that perhaps she was just being overly friendly due to the excitement surrounding the upcoming wedding. However, as time passed, I began to notice more troubling signs. She started to find excuses to touch him casually, like placing a hand on his arm during a conversation or lightly bumping into him as she walked past. These gestures were subtle yet unmistakable. I also observed her eyes lingering on him a bit too long when he wasn't looking, which made my stomach churn with discomfort. One evening, after we returned home from a family dinner where my sister had been particularly flirtatious, I decided to talk to my boyfriend about it. I turned to him and asked, "Did you notice how Sarah was behaving tonight?" He looked at me with confusion and replied, "What do you mean?" I then explained the behaviors I had observed, the excessive laughing, the unnecessary touching, and the lingering glances. He listened, but after a moment he simply shrugged and said, "I think you're overthinking it. She's probably just excited about the wedding. It's harmless." Despite his reassurances, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The situation didn't feel harmless to me at all. Despite my boyfriend's reassurances, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, so I decided to keep a closer eye on things, hoping that I was just overreacting and that my suspicions were unfounded. But the next few weeks were tense. Every time we were around my sister, I found myself constantly watching her, noticing every little thing she did. It became clear that she was always trying to position herself near my boyfriend. She would often sit next to him whenever she could, and she seemed to find endless excuses to ask for his help with wedding-related tasks, even when I was standing right there. One day, we were all at my parents' house for a family barbecue. At one point, I went inside to use the bathroom, and when I returned, I saw something that made my heart sink. My sister and my boyfriend were talking quietly in a corner of the yard, standing unusually close to one another. My sister was giggling at something he said, a sound that made my stomach churn with unease. The moment they noticed me, they quickly stepped apart, and my sister walked away as if nothing had happened. I felt a wave of nausea and anger, but decided not to confront them on the spot, not wanting to create a scene at a family gathering. Instead, I waited until we got home that night. When we were alone, I tried to approach the topic as calmly as I could. I asked my boyfriend what he and my sister had been discussing earlier. He seemed surprised by my question and explained that they were just talking about some wedding details, like the music selection. His response didn't satisfy me. I couldn't help but question why such a simple conversation required them to stand so close together. He sighed, clearly frustrated, and tried to dismiss my concerns. He assured me once again that there was nothing going on, insisting that my sister was just being friendly. But by this point, I couldn't hold back my feelings any longer. I expressed my frustration, pointing out that my sister was practically throwing herself at him, and he wasn't doing anything to stop it. My words seemed to hurt him, and he looked at me with a pained expression, asking what exactly I expected him to do. He reminded me that she was my sister, and he was simply trying to be polite. Telling her to back off seemed out of the question to him. I told him that he could at least set some boundaries, making it clear that he wasn't interested in anything more than a friendly relationship. But he insisted that he wasn't interested in her at all, claiming there was nothing to clarify because I was seeing problems that didn't exist. Our conversation went in circles, with neither of us willing to see the other's point of view, leaving us both frustrated and unsure of what to do next. After arguing for a while without any resolution, it became clear that our conversation was going nowhere. My boyfriend kept insisting that I was just imagining things, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get him to see what was so painfully obvious to me. In the end, we both went to bed feeling angry and frustrated, with the issue still unresolved. The following day, I realized that I needed to confront my sister directly. It was clear that avoiding the issue was only making things worse, so I decided to call her and ask if we could meet up for coffee. She readily agreed, her voice cheerful and seemingly unaware of my growing concerns. We arranged to meet at a small cafe near her apartment. When we met, I was nervous, my hands trembling slightly as I stirred my coffee. My sister, on the other hand, was in high spirits, chatting enthusiastically about her wedding plans. She seemed completely oblivious to my discomfort, which only made the situation more difficult for me. After a few minutes of listening to her talk, I realized I couldn't hold it in any longer. I interrupted her mid-sentence, my voice betraying the seriousness of what I was about to say. I told her that we needed to discuss something important. My sister, caught off guard by the sudden shift in tone, looked at me with surprise and asked what was wrong. Taking a deep breath to steady myself, I began to explain. I told her that I had noticed how she had been behaving around Tom, my boyfriend, and that it was making me uncomfortable. I mentioned the flirting, the casual touches, and the lingering looks, things that had been bothering me for some time. I emphasized that her behavior needed to stop. As I spoke, I watched her face transform through a range of emotions, at first surprise, then confusion, and finally anger. She demanded to know what I was talking about, vehemently denying that she had been flirting with Tom at all. I refused to back down, insisting that she had been doing exactly that, whether she realized it or not. I explained that her actions were not only inappropriate but were also causing me a great deal of distress. She responded with a laugh, though it was far from a genuine one. She told me I was being ridiculous, dismissing my concerns by saying that Tom was practically family, and that she was just being friendly. However, her words did little to ease the tension between us, and I could tell that this conversation had struck a nerve. As I sat there, it became clear that this was not going to be an easy issue to resolve, and the rift between us was likely only going to deepen. I couldn't hold back any longer and expressed my frustrations, pointing out that it was more than just friendliness. I explained that she was constantly finding excuses to be near my boyfriend, to touch him, and to laugh at all his jokes, even the ones that weren't particularly funny. To me, it was clear what she was doing, and it was making me increasingly uncomfortable. As I spoke, I could see her face turn red with anger and disbelief. She was clearly shocked by my accusations, especially since they came so close to her wedding. She responded with a sharp retort, questioning my confidence and suggesting that I must be deeply insecure to accuse her of such behavior. Her words stung, but I knew I had to stand my ground. I tried to explain that my concerns weren't about insecurity but rather about respect. I told her she was crossing a line that shouldn't be crossed, and that her behavior needed to stop immediately. Suddenly, she stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, signaling the end of our conversation. She declared that she wasn't going to sit there and listen to what she considered paranoid and ridiculous accusations. She made it clear that if I couldn't trust my own sister, then that was my problem, not hers. With that, she stormed out of the cafe, leaving me alone with a swirl of emotions. I felt awful and began to question myself. Had I overreacted? Was I really just being paranoid? When I returned home, my boyfriend immediately noticed that something was wrong. He asked me what had happened, and I recounted the conversation I had just had with my sister. As I shared the details, I could see the concern growing on his face. When I finished, he let out a heavy sigh and told me that he thought I had made a big mistake. He was worried that Sarah would be deeply hurt, especially with her wedding just around the corner. Feeling defensive, I asked him if he was taking her side. He quickly reassured me that he wasn't taking sides, but he expressed his doubts that Sarah had been flirting with him. Even if she had been, which he found unlikely, he believed that confronting her in such a direct way was not the best approach to handling the situation. His words left me feeling even more conflicted, unsure of whether I had done the right thing or not. As I felt tears welling up in my eyes, I couldn't help but ask, so what was I supposed to do? Just ignore it? The frustration and hurt were clear in my voice. Sensing my distress, my boyfriend walked over and gently wrapped his arms around me. He suggested that perhaps I could have handled things differently, that maybe I could have talked to him more about it first, or approached Sarah in a way that was less confrontational. He expressed concern that now, with the way things had unfolded, Sarah was likely upset with both of us, and that this could cast a shadow over her upcoming wedding, making everything feel incredibly awkward. Feeling overwhelmed, I pulled away from his embrace and questioned him. So this is all my fault? I needed to understand if he truly believed that I was to blame for the situation. He sighed deeply, clearly struggling to find the right words, and explained that he didn't mean to place the blame solely on me. However, he did think that I might have overreacted, letting my emotions get the better of me. We continued to argue for a while, but it became evident that we were not going to reach a resolution. There was a clear disconnect in our perspectives, and neither of us seemed willing to fully understand the other's point of view. Eventually, he decided to go to bed, leaving me alone with my swirling thoughts and doubts. The days that followed were filled with tension. My sister had stopped speaking to me entirely, creating a painful distance between us. My parents, having noticed Sarah's distress, called me, wanting to know why she was so upset. I tried to explain the situation to them, but I could tell from their responses that they too believed I had overreacted. As the wedding day drew closer, I found myself increasingly uncertain about what to do. I was supposed to be a bridesmaid, an important role that now felt more like a burden. I wasn't even sure if Sarah still wanted me to be part of her big day. My boyfriend, on the other hand, was still invited, and he suggested that we both attend to show that there were no hard feelings. But the thought of standing there, watching my sister walk down the aisle while knowing how angry and hurt she was, made me feel physically ill. The entire situation had become a tangled mess, and I didn't know how to untangle it without causing even more pain. Several times I tried to phone Sarah, but she didn't answer. She never responded when I left voicemails apologizing and stating we should have spoken. I even visited her flat, but she closed the door. My anxiety grew as the wedding day drew near. Though I wasn't convinced, my partner kept urging me to let go, saying that everything would blow over. In a dream, I showed up for the wedding, and everyone turned to stare at me, pointing and murmuring. I woke up shaking coldly. Following my confrontation with Sarah, things deteriorated. When she told our mother about my allegations, she became quite irate. She called me, screaming about how, right before Sarah's wedding, I could be so selfish and worried. She shouted, "How could you accuse your own sister of such a thing?" She wouldn't listen as I tried to explain my perspective. She advised me to straighten this problem right away and apologize to Sarah. The stress on our family was intolerable. Sarah still avoided talking to me, and right now my parents were offended as well. Tom, my partner, persisted in telling me I was exaggerating, which just made me more depressed and irritated. 1 week before the wedding, I visited my parents' place to try to straighten things out. As I got to the front door, I heard subdued voices coming from the side of the house. Intrigued, I strolled to the garden and stopped in astonishment at what I saw. There, Sarah and Tom were partly concealed behind a big plant, locked in a passionate embrace. They kissed firmly, Sarah's legs wrapped around Tom's waist, his hand beneath her top. They were completely absorbed in one another, failing to even see me standing there. I felt as though I had been given a stomach punch. All the air left my lungs, and for a minute I was unable to move or talk. As the reality of what I was witnessing began to sink in, a powerful wave of anger and betrayal surged through me. My emotions overtook me, and I found myself screaming, "What the hell is this?" My voice trembled, thick with the intensity of what I was feeling. The reaction from both of them was immediate. My sister and my boyfriend, in shock, their guilty expressions betraying them completely. Sarah's face drained of color, turning pale as she realized she had been caught, while Tom fumbled to find the right words, stammering, "It's not what it looks like." But it was exactly what it looked like, confirming every fear and suspicion that had been gnawing at me. Tears began streaming down my face as I choked out, "How could you? My own sister and my boyfriend?" The pain in my voice was unmistakable. Sarah too began to cry, her voice quivering with regret as she tried to apologize. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed, struggling to explain. "We didn't mean for this to happen." But I couldn't stand to hear any of their excuses. The betrayal was too deep, too raw. Without another word, I turned and fled, running back to my car. Their desperate calls for me to return fell on deaf ears. As I drove away, my phone began to ring repeatedly. First Tom, then Sarah, and finally my mom. I couldn't bring myself to answer any of them. The pain was too fresh, too overwhelming. When I finally arrived home, I felt numb. I immediately packed a bag with some clothes and the essentials I would need for a few days. I couldn't stay here, not after what had just happened. I sent Tom a final text message, simply stating, "We're done. Don't try to contact me again." Then I turned off my phone, cutting off any further communication, and left. Now, I'm writing this from a hotel room in a nearby city, unsure of what my next step should be. With the wedding just a few days away, I know there is no way I can attend. My relationship is shattered, and the bond I once shared with my sister may be irreparably damaged by this betrayal. It feels as though my entire world has been turned upside down. Everyone made me feel like I was crazy for suspecting something was wrong, but in the end, I was right all along. The pain of that realization is almost too much to bear, and I find myself questioning how I will ever be able to trust anyone again after this. So, Reddit, any advice on how to move forward from here would be appreciated. After the devastating shock of discovering my sister Sarah with my now ex-boyfriend Tom, I spent several days in a fog, struggling to process what had happened. My phone was constantly buzzing with messages and missed calls from both of them, as well as from my parents, but I just couldn't bring myself to respond. I was too overwhelmed, too hurt. Eventually, though, I came to see that Mark, Sarah's fiancé, was one person who definitely needed to know the truth. With a heavy heart, I made the difficult decision to call him. When Mark answered, I could hear the confusion in his voice. He asked what was going on, mentioning that Sarah had been in a terrible state, saying that I had disappeared and wasn't responding to anyone. Taking a deep breath, I began to explain everything to him. I told him about the suspicions I had initially had, how everyone, including Tom and Sarah, had brushed off my concerns, and then I described in detail the scene I had witnessed in my parents' garden. Mark listened quietly, not interrupting, only occasionally making a small noise to let me know he was still there, absorbing everything I was saying. When I finally finished, there was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. Then, in a controlled, measured voice, Mark simply thanked me for telling him, adding that he needed some time to process this information. With that, he ended the call. Afterwards, I sat there, staring blankly at my phone, wondering what Mark would do now that he knew the truth. As the wedding day approached, I heard nothing further from him or from the rest of my family. Sarah had ceased trying to contact me, and I began to suspect that she had somehow managed to convince Mark to forgive her. The thought that she might actually escape the consequences of her actions, that she could go on to have her fairy tale wedding while my life was in shambles, made me feel physically ill. I realized that there was no way I could attend the wedding. The idea of watching Sarah walk down the aisle, knowing what she had done, was too much to bear. Instead, I decided to spend that day alone, focusing on how to rebuild my life in the wake of such profound betrayal. On the evening of the wedding, I received an unexpected call from my cousin Emma. There was an unmistakable tone of excitement and urgency in her hushed voice as she said, "Oh my God, you won't believe what just happened." Confused and intrigued, I asked her what she meant. Without hesitation, Emma dove into her story, recounting the events that had unfolded. She explained that everything had seemed normal at first. Sarah had looked stunning in her wedding dress, and Mark had been standing at the altar, ready for the ceremony to begin. But when it came time for the vows, Mark had unexpectedly stepped forward and announced that he had something to say. My heart began to race as I listened to Emma describe the scene. Mark, in front of everyone, declared that he couldn't go through with the wedding. He told the guests that he could not marry someone who had betrayed her own sister and devastated her life by getting involved with her boyfriend. Emma continued, recounting how Sarah had turned completely pale at Mark's words. Then, to everyone's shock, Mark turned to my parents and apologized, telling them that they needed to know the real reason why I had distanced myself from the family. Emma went on to say that Sarah had started crying. My parents had been left startled and perplexed, and the guests had started whispering among themselves in an attempt to make sense of things. Mark had then walked out of the church, leaving Sarah sobbing alone at the altar. It was like something out of a movie, Emma told me, her voice still tinged with disbelief. Everyone's in shock. Your parents are trying to get the full story from Sarah, but she's an emotional wreck. As I sat there, absorbing everything Emma had just told me, I felt a mix of emotions. On one hand, there was a sense of vindication, knowing that the truth had finally been revealed. But on the other hand, I couldn't help but feel a deep sadness for the pain and turmoil this had brought upon my family. Emma, sensing my silence, gently asked, "Are you okay?" "I'm not sure," I said truthfully. "I never wanted it to end like this." After a little more conversation with Emma, I hung up and sat silently, attempting to sort things out. Though the truth was out, at what cost? My relationship with Sarah was broken, my relationship with Tom had ended, and now my whole family was in crisis. I came to see that, although the truth was now clear-cut, it did not instantly correct everything. Healing and regaining trust still lay a long road ahead, but I felt a little relief for the first time since this entire ordeal started. At least now I could begin to advance, free from the weight of silent facts dragging me back. Regarding what's next, I'm not sure, though I know I will eventually have to face my family. Right now, I am living one day at a time. If nothing else, this encounter has shown me the value of following my gut feeling and defending myself, even in front of people who question me. To all who helped me through my journey, thank you. Your words of encouragement have more value than you could possibly know. And to others in the same circumstances, keep in mind, rely on your gut feeling and resist being gaslighted into disbelieving your own impressions by anyone.